Hi, folks. I'm Jimmie Ratliff here at Dynamic Independence, and I'm here with Cheryl Clinkenbeard today. And she is with Gorman Management Company.
Correct.
And we're going to talk a little bit about Torrey Place, kind of specifically, and then some other HUD housing opportunities here in Bartlesville,
Correct.
and who might qualify for those, and what that would entail if someone wants to
Find housing.
find housing. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how kind of long you've been with the company?
Okay.
And then what your role is, and kind of an overview of Torrey Place and its mission.
I can do that. Well, I grew up in Bartlesville, and so I have lived here most of my life, and so it's kind of unique to be able to grow up in the city and then turn around and serve people. I've always had a compassion for people. I've worked in different jobs over the years in social services. And so I started with Gorman Management Company as a service coordinator in May of 2012.
Okay.
So I've been there quite a while now. And so my role there is as a service coordinator is to navigate and help residents to find resources.
Okay.
If that means anywhere from medical equipment to transportation, medication, food stamps, help with their electricity bill, pet care, anything you can think of, we try to find a resource. Dental, eyes, all that.
Okay.
So that's my job mainly, is to just provide assistance for that, which and then in turn helps them maintain in their home longer.
Right. So they continue to have that independent living
Correct.
aspect to their
Yes,
life for just
yes,
as long as they possibly
yes.
can.
Yes. And then Torrey specifically, it's a very unique type of situation where it's a HUD property, which means that you will have subsidy to help pay for your rent. It's based off of your income. But Torrey is unique in the fact part of the criteria to live there, you have to have a mental illness, a chronic mental illness diagnosis,
Okay.
which means you are in care of a doctor or a therapist for at least 6 months. Because if you think about it, to be diagnosed, a doctor would need to see you for at least 6 months before they can make that diagnosis.
Right.
And then that's important to where you're in compliance with a treatment plan, whether that's medication or a therapist. Maybe see your doctor once a year, just as long as you have that care to maintain independent living and stability, then that's part of our criteria. And that's part of the application process.
So, speaking of the application process, then is there specific documentation? So there's something required from those doctors?
Yes, there's it's called an affidavit, a medical affidavit that a doctor will sign, and it has just questions about if this person is compliant, have they seen them for at least 6 months, and just some basic questions just to make sure that they are compliant and they're in that treatment plan.
Now, is that something that they would get from their doctor specifically, or
No,
is that
it's
included
actually
in your
it's
pack?
part of our application.
Okay.
So the application has a lot of questions about your income, because you have to be about $2,200 or less a month.
Okay.
And so part of the application has all those lists of questions about your income, landlord verifications, just about any other HUD property, the same process. Our application for Torrey just has that one more document.
Okay.
And so when you apply, you have to have your birth certificate, social security card, and a photo ID. And that's where I tell people, if you're really interested in HUD housing, make sure you have those documents. Because if you're helping somebody and they don't have that birth certificate, that's the first thing to do, is to make sure they have those documents. Otherwise, they cannot get on our waiting list.
Okay.
And waiting lists are usually about anywhere from 9 to 12 months in Bartlesville. So if you think you want to live there or at any HUD property, get their application turned in.
Okay, excellent. So you kind of answered my next question, which is how long does that application and approval process take?
Yeah.
Do you generally see someone who has that meets the criteria and gets that medical affidavit? Do you see any of that ever denied, or do you have any?
Yeah, there's
anything
times that I
happens
feel
that?
like a lot of times people that are in transition, unfortunately homeless population, they will apply, but they don't have that medical doctor's diagnosis.
Right.
And that's really a struggle, because we know they need it, but they don't have a doctor they've been seeing. So they are denied sometimes because of that.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Or somebody who just moved here, but they just moved here, we tell them, well, contact your doctor. If you moved here from, Kansas, contact that doctor. Usually the reason for denial is a bad landlord, which is unfortunate, landlord verification, or they don't have a mental illness diagnosis.
Okay. And that doesn't mean they don't have a mental illness. That just means they haven't gone to the doctor and gotten that formally diagnosed somewhere, and that's very important.
Yes. And I emphasize, if somebody comes in, I want to help them. If they don't qualify for, if they're over income, don't have the chronic mental illness diagnosis, or maybe their criminal background, I have a list of options for them.
Okay.
There's housing, for those situations. If you have a background, a criminal background, there's programs in Tulsa. So I like to make sure that people have an option if they don't fit for our program.
Okay.
So that's important, because housing is hard to find, and if you don't have the resources, then I want to make sure they have those.
Okay. So we have a question that just came up, and so the question is, are there family units that are available?
Good question. It is single occupancy. That's tough, but that's how this program is. Torrey was built in 1996, and there was a family, beautiful family. I could say her name because we give her gifts and stuff, and recognized her. Fran Solly. She worked with Grand Lake in 96. She had her son that had a mental illness, and when they closed down the hospitals back in the day, she wanted to find a place for her son. And so when they zoned it and created this program, they made it single occupancy. So it stayed that way ever since then, which can be a challenge because a lot of people want to have somebody move in with them, but it seems like over the years it's stayed that way, because with a mental illness, I guess it's just sometimes easier to not have a roommate.
Now, that's specifically for Torrey. So there will be other properties maybe that Gorman manages as well, or these other HUD housing programs, do they have those types of options?
So the Willows here in Bartlesville, it's multifamily, and they have 1-2 bedroom apartments and homes, and so there are other options. Again, we can help find those options for them.
Okay, excellent.
And the elderly housing is 2 occupancy, or 2 residents can live there.
Okay, so if you have
Double
elderly
occupancy,
couple or something
correct,
like that, then they could live there. So let's talk a little bit about utilities, because some places I know that there's utilities included sometimes, and sometimes there's not.
Yeah.
What
So
is that
the way that works, so if it's all bills paid, then that basically means that their rent's going to be a little bit higher because their subsidy is absorbed through that.
Sure.
So if you go to a property, so Torrey is all bills paid, which makes it really easy. You don't have to worry about getting a gas bill or electric bill. At some properties, you're correct, like at Bartlesville Senior on Leisure Lane, the resident has their own utilities, their own electric and gas.
Okay.
But there is a subsidy, so their rent's a little bit lower to give them the money to pay for their electric.
I got you. And is that's still based upon income as well at seniors?
Yes. So all those. So Madison Village, the Willows, which has multifamily and elderly in the homes, and then Bartlesville Senior Apartments on Leisure Lane. Those are all elderly housing.
Okay.
HUD housing.
Okay. So we kind of had a follow-up question. So if you have a previous eviction, are you eligible? And it kind of sounds like that's kind of that whole that landlord thing right there.
And there's like a very strict HUD guideline on those. And so I'm not the manager, so I'm not going to try to repeat those rules. Just because you have an eviction does not automatically disqualify you. A lot of it, is communication and explaining, or maybe it was 10, 20 years ago. There's a pretty strict guideline on that. So I always tell people, apply. You just never know.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like just apply.
Outside of the single occupancy, and then maybe the monetary kind of restrictions, so they don't go over a cap on how much money that they're getting every month, say, and then continuing their ongoing, say specifically for Torrey, the counseling or whatever, that doctor prescribed regimen that they need to have. Is there any other requirements to continue living there?
Mainly just to keep their apartment as we would expect at any other place. It's independent living, so we want to make sure that they, as you would call it, ADLs, active daily living.
Right.
They're responsible for their cooking, their cleaning, their laundry, managing their medication. Now, if they require assistance with the case management through like Day Springs or Grand Lake Mental Health, then we will get them those services. So they're independent, however, they might need assistance, and that's where I come in and say, okay, you're struggling a little bit with your ADLs, keeping your house clean. So maybe you need case management. Maybe we need to get you on the Advantage program. So we make sure that they have those resources. So they are required to keep their home clean, safe, sanitary. And if they need assistance, then we try to find those.
So those would be like any kind of in-home support that they would need to continue that independent living. So if you have someone who's interested in kind of getting into this for Torrey Place or for any of these others, you said that waiting list can be 9 to 12 months. So how do they get started? Do they call you directly?
All the above. So there's an application online. which our websites aren't the greatest, but you can print it off from there or call us and we'll make sure that we have them available. You can call me, you can stop by the office. I admit it's tricky to find us because we work at 3 or 4 locations, but we try to keep them available in our community rooms.
Sure.
But there's no harm in calling us and saying I'm going to be by. We can mail them to them. So just different ways, and then they can bring them back to us.
Okay.
With their documents.
Here, we've worked with you all in the past to also get some of those. So if people have trouble reaching out or getting contact, they can always reach out to us, and we can help facilitate that as well.
And a lot of the therapists here in town, I know like Day Springs and Grand Lake Mental Health, they have copies of the applications for that reason too.
Okay.
So they can help a client.
Excellent. So is there anything else that you feel like that we need to add to this as far as additional properties or any other additional things about Torrey Place that you can think of?
I think just the main thing to remember is mental health. There's no stigma to remove that. You know, I feel like sometimes people put that in a box and judge, and I think we need to keep that in mind and remove that stigma. You know, there's lots of statistics out there that, 1 in 5 adults have a mental illness, and so when we think about mental illness, I think we need to not judge somebody and be open to all options.
Right. And I'll speak for myself personally. I struggle with depression and anxiety, and I see a counselor periodically, and I have medications. And the one thing that you have to realize that even if somebody has a disability, and even if it's an invisible disability, because a lot of people think of disabilities as being something that is maybe a mobility issue or something that people can see on the outside, doesn't mean that people aren't struggling with something or that people don't have that. So if you feel like you need to get help for that, then see a doctor, see a therapist, get the diagnosis if you need it. People with disabilities are people too.
Yes.
Whether you can see the disability or not. So we are, we're here to help with that. I know that you all are there to help with that. And it's just very important to remember that people are people, no matter what.
Reminds me, one of the biggest questions I get a lot when people call to ask if they can live there, they say, well, I'm on disability. And that is not the requirement.
Right.
It's the mental health diagnosis, the chronic illness diagnosis, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, PTSD, depression. So that's what gets you in. You don't have to be on disability. If you're a zero income, your rent's zero.
Right.
And so that's what's unique about Torrey Place is it really meets the needs of somebody with a chronic mental illness to where when they all live there together, all of us together, they're a peer support for each other.
Sure.
And when you're struggling and we recognize, hey, my neighbor hasn't been outside in 3 or 4 days, we can go say, knock on the door, and are you struggling? Are you okay? We're there for each other.
Right.
And so where at other properties, you may not have that peer support because it's not disclosed.
Right.
To where if I recognize a resident is struggling with housekeeping or just not getting out and isolating, then I can say, we need to call your therapist, your doctor, your family, who's your support system, recognize that, or maybe they didn't get their medication refilled and they need transportation, and we try to figure all that and remove those obstacles. That way they can remain stable.
Right.
It's just that support system, and that's what's really unique about it. And as I was mentioning earlier, there's a Torrey Place apartment, a similar place in Stillwater and Ponca City. So if that's something somebody's interested, they can call me and I'll get you that information as well.
Excellent. So there's some resources that are out there outside of Bartlesville if people are watching this and they have that need elsewhere too.
They might have a shorter waiting list. I mean, if you need housing, there's options out there.
All right, perfect. Cheryl, I appreciate you coming in and talking to us today, and we hope to have you back to discuss some other things at a later date. And if anybody has any questions, be sure you post those down in the comments. We will follow up with those in our next live. Also, feel free to reach out to us here at Dynamic Independence. We're at 1110 Southeast Frank Phillips Boulevard, 918-335-1314. And we'd be happy to hear from you and help you get on the path to independence or get any kind of other disability need. Do you want to give some contact information?
Yes, you can reach me at Torrey Place Apartments. Number is 918-336-1288, extension 2. And the address is 901 South